It may be said, indeed, that the Constitution has given to the executive the power to annul the acts of the legislative body by refusing to them his assent. So a similar power has necessarily resulted from that instrument to the judiciary. And yet, the judiciary forms no part of the legislature. There is, it is true, this difference between these grants of power. The executive can put his negative upon the acts of the legislature for other cause than that of want of conformity to the Constitution, whilst the judiciary can only declare those which violate that instrument. But the decision of the judiciary is final in such a case, whereas in every instance where the veto of the executive is applied, it may be overcome by a vote of 2/3 of both houses of Congress. The negative upon the acts of the legislative by the executive authority, and that in the hands of one individual, would seem to be an incongruity in our system. Like some others of a similar character, however, it appears to be highly expedient, and if used only with the forbearance and in the spirit which was intended by its authors, it may be productive of great good and be found one of the best safeguards to the Union. At the period of the formation of the Constitution, the principle does not appear to have enjoyed much favor in the state government. It existed but in two, and in one of these, there was a plural executive. If we would search for the motives which operated upon the purely patriotic and enlightened assembly which framed the Constitution for the adoption of a provision so apparently repugnant to the leading democratic principle that the majority should ignominiously govern, we must reject the idea that they anticipated from it any benefit to the ordinary course of legislation. They knew too well the high degree of intelligence which existed among the people and the enlightened character of the state legislature not to have the fullest confidence that the two bodies elected by them would be worthy representatives of such constituents, and, of course, that they would require no aid in conceiving and maturing the measure which the circumstances of the country might require. And it is preposterous to suppose that a thought could, for a moment, have been entertained that the president, placed at the capital in the center of the country, could better understand the wants and wisdom of the people than their own immediate representatives, who spend a part of every year among them, living with them, often laboring with them, and bound to them by the triple tie of interest, duty, and affection. To assist or control Congress, then, in its ordinary legislation, could not conceivably have been the motive for conferring the veto power on the president. This argument acquires additional force from the fact of its never having been thus used by the first 6 presidents, and 2 of them were members of the convention, one presiding over its deliberations and the other bearing a larger share in consummating the labors of that august body than any other person. But if bills were never returned to Congress by either of the presidents above referred to, upon the ground of their being inexpedient or not as well adapted as they might be to the wants of the people, the veto was applied upon that of want of conformity to the Constitution or become error, which had been committed from a too hasty enactment. There is another ground for the adoption of the veto principle, which had probably more influence in recommending it to the convention than any other. Okay.
That's good. How's that?
That's the inauguration of William Henry Harrison. He misspelled a word here. Probably is. Forbearance. How do you spell forbearance?
PNC for FOREBEA.
How do you spell forbearance?
Maybe without me.
It's F-O-R, not F-O-R-E. Yes, F-O-R-E. Okay. That was one of the spelling words in this Supreme Court test.
Forbearance.
Yeah. It's a common word in court. All right, you want to read?
Yeah. Do you want to read this section? It may be said, indeed, that the Constitution, maybe I dropped right at the start, that the Constitution.
I have the baby said, indeed, the Constitution.
That the Constitution,
Uh,
what?
Has given to the executive
Mhm.
the power to annul the acts of the legislative body by refusing to them his assent. So a similar power has necessarily resulted from that instrument to the judiciary, and yet the judiciary forms no part of the legislature. It is true, this difference between these grants of power. The executive can put his negative upon the acts of the legislature for other cause than that of want of conformity to the Constitution, whilst the judiciary can only declare those which violate that instrument.
Void those.
I don't have void.
Oh, no?
No, I have.
But the decision of the judiciary is final in such a case, whereas in every instance where the veto of the executive is applied, it may be overcome by a vote of 2/3 of both houses of Congress. The negative upon the acts of the legislative by the executive authority, and that the hands of one individual would seem to be an incongruity in our system. Like some others, a similar character, how far it appears to be, while
Of a similar character. However,
it appears to be highly expedient, and if used only with the forbearance and in the spirit which was
which one?
intended by its authors, it may be productive of great good and be found one of the best safeguards to the Union.
Okay.
What something's wrong with my hearing?